Riá Marlowe Chronicles. The city she left behind. They say the truth will set you free, but first, it's going to make you think. I'm Riá Marlowe, and today I'm taking you back to a time when life moved slower, but the choices carried the weight of a lifetime. Before the gravel roads of Kentucky, there was the pavement of the city. In 1962, Annie Mae wasn't a caretaker. She wasn't a ghost in a farmhouse. She was a woman in her prime, 41 years old, with the wind of the 60s at her back. She had a job she loved, a paycheck she earned with pride, and a life that belonged entirely to her. She lived in an apartment with wide windows that welcomed the city lights. She had friends she met for coffee, records she played on Friday nights, and the kind of independence women were only beginning to claim for themselves. She wore the hemlines of the day, navigated the bustle of downtown streets, and carried herself like a woman whose life pointed forward, never back. She believed she was going home to Kentucky for a few days of rest. She expected to be back in her apartment by Monday morning. She left her plants on the windowsill, her books on the nightstand, and locked her door fully expecting to turn the key again within a week. But Kentucky has a way of holding onto you. When she pulled into Nana's driveway and saw the state of the house, the peeling paint, the tired windows, the weeds climbing the stairs, something inside her shifted. When she stepped inside and smelled the dust of neglect, when she saw the thinness of Nana's frame, the city lights dimmed in her mind. She didn't just see a dirty house. She saw abandonment. She saw a woman who had been left behind by her own children who lived close enough to hear the screen door slam if the wind caught it right. Annie Mae looked at her suitcase, then at the grandmother who had been her world since birth. Her heart nearly stopped at the condition Nana had been left in. The dust, the neglect, the weight loss, it all hit her at once. It was clear no one had been checking on Nana regularly, not even the ones who lived minutes away. Her own mother had already passed, and she knew without question that if her mother were still alive, Nana would never have been left like that. Without hesitation, she knew she'd have to go back to the city and make a life-altering decision. She wouldn't be going back to work. She'd go back to break her lease, to tell her boss she wouldn't be coming in on Monday, or ever again. She'd go back to give away the furniture that wouldn't fit in a farmhouse bedroom. Every box she taped shut would be a goodbye to her freedom. Every key she handed back to her landlord would be a sacrifice. She chose the silence of the Kentucky hills over the music of the city, not because she had to, but because her heart wouldn't let her do anything else. There is a specific sound a gravel driveway makes when you haven't been home in a long time. It's a crunch that signals arrival, but for Annie Mae, that sound marked the beginning of a heavy silence. When she stepped out of her car that afternoon in 1962, the Kentucky heat pressed down on her like a physical weight. But the real weight was the sight of the porch. The paint peeling like sunburned skin. The weeds climbing the steps. The windows, once the eyes of a proud home, now dull and tired. Inside, the air was still. It smelled of peppermint, old paper, and the unmistakable scent of a life that had slowed to a crawl. Annie Mae found Nana in her chair, thinner than the letters had suggested. Her hands, once busy with quilts and canning jars, rested quietly in her lap. In that moment, Annie Mae realized the vacation was not meant to be. She wasn't there to rest. She was there to witness. What settled deepest in her bones was the knowledge that Nana wasn't alone in the world. She had daughters. She had family members who lived close enough to hear the screen door slam if the wind caught it right. But they had their own lives, too preoccupied with the modern world of the 60s to notice the queen they'd left to wither in her own home. That night, Annie Mae sat at the kitchen table listening to crickets and the heavy breathing of a woman who needed her. She thought about her apartment in the city. She thought about her friends and her paycheck. She looked at the grime on the baseboards and the empty cupboards and made a silent vow. She didn't call the family to argue. She didn't ask them to help. She simply stood up, found a rag and a bucket, and started to scrub. When she drove back to the city the next day, it wasn't to stay. It was to settle her affairs. She told herself it would be a few months, maybe a year. The choice at the driveway. Every box she taped shut was a goodbye to her freedom. Every key she handed back to her landlord was a sacrifice. She chose the silence of the Kentucky hills over the music of the city, Not because she had to, but because her heart wouldn't let. She didn't know she wouldn't truly leave that house for 5 more years. She didn't know the same people who were too busy to help Nana would be the first in line to claim the house once the work was done. But that didn't matter yet. Love doesn't check the deed. Love just picks up the bucket and gets to work. 5 years of silence. Time in a farmhouse doesn't move the way it does in the city. In the city, time is measured by clocks, deadlines, and paychecks. In that Kentucky house, time was measured by the seasons, fields turning from green to gold, then fading into the brittle gray of winter. When Annie Mae moved in, the world outside continued to change, but her world narrowed to 4 walls and one responsibility. For 5 years, from 1962 to 1967, that house became her entire universe. The world saw moon landings, cultural revolutions, and national turmoil. But inside that farmhouse, the only things that mattered were the temperature of the soup and the comfort of a woman who was slowly fading. Life became a collection of small, steady tasks. The rhythm of laundry. The smell of starch on a Sunday morning. The quiet strength required to lift a woman who had once lifted you. Annie Mae rarely spoke about those years, but when she did, the weight of them was unmistakable. She told stories of winter storms when the heat failed, and she wrapped Nana in every quilt in the house, staying awake through the night just to make sure she was still breathing. She spoke of long nights, quiet mornings, and the kind of exhaustion that settles into your bones. And where was the rest of the family? They checked in through Christmas cards. They made occasional appearances at Sunday dinners, eating meals Annie Mae had spent all day preparing, nodding at the cleanliness of the house, and leaving before the sun went down. They saw the house was being taken care of, so they weren't worried. They treated Annie Mae like part of the furniture, permanent, unpaid, expected. She never saw one red cent. Not for the medicine. Not for the groceries. Not for her time. She wasn't an employee, she was a granddaughter. But to the family watching from a distance, she was something else entirely, a convenience. One afternoon, Nana called her to the table. A lawyer sat beside her. Nana slid the papers toward her and said, "This is for your life, because you gave yours to me." She put the house in Annie Mae's name right then and there. It was the only thing Nana had left to give. Not long after, Nana's health declined sharply. The house grew quieter. The nights grew longer. And one morning, after 5 years of care, Nana slipped away. The silence that followed wasn't peaceful. It was the kind of silence that comes after years of holding someone else's world together, a silence filled with exhaustion, grief, and the faint hope that the family would finally show up with compassion. But compassion wasn't what arrived next. The vultures. Death has a way of bringing out the best in some people and the absolute worst in others. When Nana finally closed her eyes for the last time, the silence in that Kentucky farmhouse was broken almost immediately. Not by mourning, not by prayer, but by the sound of tires on gravel. The vultures had arrived. My aunt, Nana's eldest daughter, the same woman who hadn't visited in years, showed up at the front door. Not with flowers, not with condolences, but with a brand new deed she had been arranging behind Nana's back while Annie Mae was busy caretaking. She walked in with the confidence of someone who had done nothing wrong, even though she had been absent through every fever, every storm, every long night. A tense stillness filled the living room as they stood facing 2 deeds, the one Nana had signed for Annie Mae, and the one my aunt had quietly redirected into her own name. Annie Mae didn't argue. She didn't raise her voice. She had been raised to respect her elders, even when they were wrong. So she stood there in silence, holding her pain the way she had been taught, inward, steady, and controlled, while her aunt explained the paperwork she had arranged behind her back. Her aunt had found a loophole, a signature, a filing, a lie told to a judge, and Annie Mae endured it without protest. Not because she agreed. Not because she didn't understand what was happening. But because respect for elders had been drilled into her long before betrayal ever entered the room. That kind of upbringing shapes a person. It becomes a code, a quiet discipline, a way of surviving without losing yourself. It becomes a kind of moral backbone that doesn't bend easily, even under pressure. Annie Mae saw quickly that the family she'd never served, the same ones who left all the work to her, still treated her like an outsider. They hadn't lifted a hand for Nana, yet they wanted the house, the furniture, and her gone. She looked toward her other aunts for some kind of relief, but there was nothing. She didn't know if they were afraid of their oldest sister. No one ever went against her. And they didn't care if Annie Mae walked away with nothing, not even, as she always said, 1 red cent. It wasn't just a legal maneuver. It was a violation of trust. A rewriting of history. A dismissal of years of sacrifice. My aunt hadn't been there for the midnight fevers. She hadn't been there when the roof leaked or when Nana's mind began to wander. She hadn't been there for the long nights, the cold mornings, or the years of caretaking. But she was there for the deed. In the 1960s and 70s, a woman's signature and legal standing could be fragile. My aunt moved through loopholes like a snake in tall grass. She used the family's reputation in the community. She whispered that Annie Mae was just a granddaughter. She twisted the facts until years of scrubbing floors and changing bandages looked like charity instead of commitment. Annie Mae watched quietly as the same woman who hadn't lifted a finger to help her own mother suddenly found the energy to fight a legal war. She thought she had lost everything, but she hadn't lost herself. The Greyhound ticket. After the deed was taken from under her, the house felt different. Not because Nana was gone, Annie Mae had already made peace with that loss, but because of what the family revealed in the days that followed. Their silence. Their avoidance. Their willingness to let the oldest sister speak for all of them. Their refusal to acknowledge the years Annie Mae had poured into that home. She walked through each room quietly, touching the furniture she had polished, the curtains she had washed, the floors she had scrubbed. She wasn't angry. She wasn't bitter. She was simply done. Her mother had raised her to respect her elders, and she had honored that teaching even when it cost her everything. But respect didn't mean she had to stay. One afternoon, she stood in the kitchen, the same kitchen where she had cooked every meal for 5 years, and realized she had nothing left to give this family. Not another day. Not another explanation. Not another ounce of her strength. She didn't argue. She didn't plead. She didn't ask for fairness. She simply walked to the rotary phone on the wall and dialed her daughter Ruth in California. "I'm ready," she said. That was all. Ruth didn't ask questions. She didn't need details. She heard the exhaustion in her mother's voice, the kind that comes from carrying a burden alone, and she acted immediately. "Mom, I'll send you a Greyhound ticket." Annie Mae packed only what she could carry: 2 worn suitcases, a few dresses, her Bible, and the dignity she refused to let anyone take from her. She left the quilts. She left the china. She left the house keys on the counter for the ones who had fought so hard to take what they never earned. When she stepped onto that blue and white bus, she wasn't defeated. She was free. The bus pulled away from the station, rolling past the fields she had known since childhood. She didn't look back. She sat upright, hands folded in her lap, watching the Kentucky hills fade into the distance. 2,000 miles stretched ahead of her, miles of mountains, deserts, and open road, carrying her toward a new life in California. A life where she would no longer be used. A life where she would no longer be silent. A life where her work, her presence, and her heart would finally be valued. She left them with the house. But she left with her dignity. And in the end, that was the most valuable thing in the room. California. California is a long way from Kentucky. The air is different, the light is different, and for Annie Mae, the ending was different too. When she arrived, she moved in with her daughter, trading the silence of an empty Kentucky farmhouse for a home filled with movement, voices, and the daily rhythm of a large family. She helped raise 6 grandchildren and managed a household that was always in motion. She admired and respected her son-in-law, and he felt the same toward her. He nicknamed her Big Amma, and before long, all the grandchildren called her that too. California hustle, the happy transition. When Annie Mae first arrived in California, something in her shifted, and it shifted fast. It was as if the moment she stepped off that bus, the weight she'd carried for years slid right off her shoulders. California didn't just give her a new address. It gave her permission to breathe again. She became vibrant. She became social. She became the happy-go-lucky woman she had been long before life demanded so much from her. Her daughter's house was full, 6 grandkids, noise, movement, life, but Annie Mae fit right into the rhythm. She laughed more. She dressed brighter. She walked lighter. She had a spark in her eyes that people noticed the moment she entered a room. And that spark? It didn't take long to turn into something bigger. The poker game started almost by accident. A few women from the neighborhood stopped by one Friday evening, and Annie Mae pulled out a deck of cards just to pass the time. But the moment she shuffled that deck, something clicked. It was natural. It was effortless. It was her. She didn't play, she hosted. And she hosted like she had been doing it her whole life. The women loved it. They loved the atmosphere she created, warm, safe, funny, and just mischievous enough to feel like a secret club. They loved the way she kept the table running smooth, the way she teased them, the way she made everyone feel welcome. Before long, the games became a weekly ritual. Women only, that was Annie Mae's rule. A sanctuary disguised as a card table. And Annie Mae? She ran it like a business, a ministry, and a comedy show all at once. She had a system, drinks on the counter, cards on the table, rules everyone knew not to test. She sold the drinks, her daughter sold the dinners, and together they made money every Friday night. It wasn't loud or flashy. It was steady, honest, woman-made income that kept the house buzzing with life. But Annie Mae didn't drink. Not a sip. Not even on the nights when the laughter got loud and the women begged her to, just taste this. She'd wave them off with that little half smile and say, "No, ma'am. I've seen enough of that mess in my childhood." And she had. She remembered her uncle back in Kentucky, the way he used to serve moonshine out of mason jars like it was water. She remembered the men stumbling around the yard afterward, loud, sloppy, and foolish. She remembered the smell of it, the way it clung to their clothes, the way their voices changed when the liquor hit their system. She remembered watching them act stupid, falling over themselves, arguing about nothing. And she made a promise right then. She would never be a drunk. She would never let alcohol make a fool out of her. She would always stay in control. So while the women at her table sipped and laughed, Annie Mae stayed sharp, clear-eyed, focused, running the room with the kind of authority that didn't require raising her voice. She kept the peace. She kept the money straight. She kept the jokes rolling. And she kept her dignity, always. Those poker nights weren't just a hustle. They were a reflection of who she was, disciplined, joyful, principled, and full of life. A woman who could create community without losing herself in the process. Lesson backfired. There are moments in a family's history that become legend, not because they were planned, but because they revealed something true about the people involved. The night Annie Mae taught her grandchildren a lesson about curiosity was one of those moments. The poker crowd had gone home, the laughter still lingering in the walls like perfume. Annie Mae was cleaning the kitchen when she noticed something was off. A bottle she kept tucked away, not for herself, but for the women who liked a little something in their cup, had been moved. She didn't yell. She didn't fuss. She didn't even raise her voice. She decided to teach a lesson. She lined all 6 grandchildren up in the kitchen, oldest to youngest, and poured each of them a tiny cup. Just enough to taste. Just enough to make her point. "You want to know what it tastes like," she said. "Go on. Drink it." They looked at her wide-eyed, confused, but nobody dared disobey Annie Mae. One by one, they took their sip. And one by one, they started gagging, coughing, spitting, throwing up, running to the sink, running to the bathroom, falling over each other trying to get the taste out of their mouths. Every single one of them got sick, exactly as she expected. Except one. While the rest were bent over, miserable and regretting every decision that led them to that moment, he stood there wiping his mouth, calm as could be. Then he looked up at her and said, "Can I have another drink, please?" Annie Mae stared at him, stunned. The lesson she was trying to teach had flown clean over his head. She shook her head, half frustrated, half amused, and muttered, "Lord, this one is going to be a handful." He liked the taste of it, and she wished she'd left him out of that lesson altogether. But that night became a family legend, The time Annie Mae tried to scare the curiosity out of her grandkids and ended up discovering the one child who could stomach it. A moment that would be retold for decades, always with laughter, always with that same shake of the head. Playful son-in-law bond. One of the sweetest parts of Annie Mae's California chapter was the relationship she built with her son-in-law. They had a playful, teasing, easy bond, the kind that grows naturally when two people genuinely enjoy each other's company. He'd joke with her about the women-only rule. "Annie Mae, you mean to tell me I can't even peek in the kitchen?" She'd wave him off with a laugh. "Not unless you plan on wearing a skirt and sittin' at the table." He'd shake his head, smiling, and say, "You're something else, Bigama." And she was. He respected her hustle. He admired her independence. He loved the way she brought life into the house. And she loved the way he treated her, with kindness, with humor, with genuine affection. Their relationship was light, warm, and full of mutual respect. He wasn't threatened by her presence, he welcomed it. And she wasn't a burden, she was a blessing. They were so close that they even had keys to each other's cars. It became their quiet little routine. He'd slip into her car because he knew it was almost always full of gas. And when she ended up with his, she'd shake her head at the empty tank, laughing to herself as she drove it to the station. It was their unspoken exchange, their running joke, their way of looking out for each other without ever saying a word. That kind of closeness doesn't happen by accident. It grows from trust, affection, and the comfort of knowing someone sees you, values you, and enjoys you. A bond like that becomes a kind of chosen family connection, something deeper than obligation. She cherished that bond. It was one of the brightest parts of her California years. The woman before caregiving. California gave Annie Mae back to herself. She was lively. She was social. She was confident. She was free. She had a routine, a purpose, a community, and a little side money of her own. She had laughter in her voice and joy in her steps. She had a house full of grandchildren and a dining room full of women who adored her. This was the Annie Mae who existed before caregiving took over her life. The Annie Mae who knew how to enjoy herself. The Annie Mae who knew how to make a dollar stretch and a room light up. The Annie Mae who knew how to turn a simple Friday night into a memory. California didn't just change her life. It reminded her who she had always been. Move-out threat. One time, the fussing between her daughter and son-in-law got so constant that Annie Mae finally had enough. She didn't like noise, she didn't like chaos, and she certainly didn't like grown folks arguing in front of children. So she packed her bags, straightened her dress, and announced she was moving out. The whole house froze. Her son-in-law rushed to her before she could even reach the door. "Bigama, please don't go," he said, his voice soft but desperate. "I promise I'll stop all that fussin'. It's her, she starts it. But I'll stop. I swear I will." He wasn't just saying it to calm her down. He meant it. Because he knew what she brought into that home: stability, peace, wisdom, and a kind of love that held the whole family together. She wasn't just helping raise the children. She was helping hold the marriage together, helping keep the house running, helping keep the spirit of the home steady. "We need you here," he told her. "This family needs you." And he was right. Their bond was already strong, the teasing, the shared jokes, the way they could talk without talking, but that moment sealed it. He didn't want to lose her presence, her guidance, or her quiet authority. Their bond was so natural that they even shared car keys. Larry would take her car whenever he could, mostly because he knew hers always had a full tank. It was their unspoken exchange, their running joke, their way of looking out for each other without ever saying a word. From that day on, he kept his promise. The fussing slowed. The house calmed. And Annie Mae stayed, not because she had to, but because she was loved, needed, and deeply valued. Texas trip, a cry she didn't understand. There was a family trip to Texas, and Annie Mae stayed behind to keep the baby while her daughter, son-in-law, and the rest of the kids drove out for a visit. She wasn't much for traveling anymore, especially after her 5-year ordeal. She was glad to stay. She loved that child, and he adored her. But the moment they pulled out of the driveway, he started crying. Not a soft whimper. Not a fussy spell. A deep, aching cry that wouldn't let up. Annie Mae did everything she knew to comfort him. She rocked him. She sang to him. She walked the floor with him. She held him close and whispered, "It's all right, baby. They'll be back soon." She thought he was crying because he couldn't go on the trip because he was spoiled or sensitive or just missing his mama and daddy. She had no idea something far more serious was happening inside his tiny body. He cried the entire time they were gone. Hour after hour. Day into night. Night into morning. She never left his side. She tried warm cloths, cool cloths, rubbing his back, rubbing his belly, rocking him until her arms ached. Nothing helped. He cried until he was exhausted, and then he cried some more. When his parents finally returned, Annie Mae handed him over with relief and worry in her eyes. "He ain't stopped crying since y'all left," she said. "Something ain't right." Her son-in-law Larry took one look at the baby and knew it too. He didn't waste a second. He grabbed the keys and rushed him straight to the doctor. What Annie Mae didn't know, what none of them knew, was that the baby's appendix had ruptured. All that crying wasn't sadness. It was pain. Real, dangerous pain. Larry got him to the doctor just in time. Just in time for the diagnosis. Just in time for the surgery. Just in time to save his life. When the doctor explained how close they had come, Annie Mae's knees nearly gave out. She had held that baby through every tear, every scream, every hour of agony, never knowing she was holding a child fighting for his life. And Larry never forgot it. He never forgot her devotion. He never forgot how she stayed up with that baby when she didn't understand what was wrong. He never forgot that she kept him alive long enough for him to get help. It became one of the stories that defined their bond, a moment of fear, love, and grace woven into the fabric of their family history. A moment that becomes a kind of family origin story, the kind you carry with you forever. Fuss, fuss, fuss. Life in that California house wasn't always quiet, and Annie Mae saw her share of family storms. Ruth and Larry could fuss with the best of them, and one weekend, Ruth let him have it from the moment he walked through the door. He'd been gone the whole weekend, and she was not about to let that slide. Annie Mae stayed out of it, folding clothes in the next room, but she heard every word. Larry didn't argue back. He didn't defend himself. He just let Ruth fuss, following him from room to room, her voice rising with every step. Then, without warning, he reached into his pocket, pulled out a thick stack of bills, $10,000 of his gambling winnings, and tossed it right onto the bed. The fussing stopped instantly. Ruth stared at the money, stared at him, and just like that, silence. Not another word. Not another complaint. Not another breath of fussing. Annie Mae peeked around the corner, shook her head, and laughed to herself. She had lived long enough to know that sometimes peace didn't come from talking, sometimes it came from $10,000 landing on a bed at the right moment. Annie Mae used to joke, with that dry humor only she could pull off, Larry couldn't hold a steady job to save his life, but he sure knew how to gamble. It was her way of telling the truth without ever raising her voice, a kind of family humor wisdom that softened even the hardest stories. It became one of those family tales that lived on for years the time Ruth fussed all weekend, and Larry shut it down with one dramatic gesture and a stack of winnings big enough to hush the whole house. Larry's boldness on full display. There was a whole rhythm to Larry's life that stretched far beyond California, those long, dusty drives back to Texas, where he was from and where his people still lived. One evening, Larry sat down with Ruth and Annie Mae and told them a story from his younger days in Texas, a story so wild that by the time he finished, both women were staring at him like he had just confessed to wrestling a tornado. He explained how he had worked a long, back-breaking day for a white man in Texas. 8 hours of hard labor under the hot sun, sweat pouring, muscles burning, the kind of work you feel in your bones. When the day was done, Larry walked over to get his pay. The man looked him dead in the face and said, "I'm not paying you." Just like that. No shame. No hesitation. No explanation. Larry said he stood there for a second, trying to decide if he heard him right. Then he realized the man meant it. He wasn't paying anybody. But Larry wasn't anybody. He calmly reached into his pocket, pulled out his gun, and said, "You may not pay these other cats, but you're gonna pay me." Ruth's mouth dropped open. Annie Mae blinked twice, leaned forward, and said, "Larry," like she was calling on Jesus himself. He said the man paid him so fast the money practically flew into his hands. But the story didn't end there. When Larry's father found out what happened, he didn't congratulate him. He didn't laugh. He didn't even breathe for a second. He said, "Boy, you need to get out of Texas tonight." Because in the 1950s, a black man pulling a gun on a white man in Texas wasn't bold, it was life-threatening. It was the kind of moment that could end a life before it even had a chance to begin. A moment shaped by the brutal realities of Jim Crow danger, where one wrong move could erase a future. Larry said he packed up, grabbed what he could, and hightailed it out of Texas before the sun came up. When he finished telling the story, Ruth and Annie Mae just sat there, stunned, bewildered, and trying to understand how he was even alive to tell it. Annie Mae finally shook her head and said, "Lord have mercy, this man got 9 lives." And Larry just grinned, proud and unbothered, like it was just another Tuesday. Family Yosemite trips. One Saturday morning, Larry woke up in a fantastic mood and loaded the car with his wife and kids for a trip to Yosemite, one of those rare, perfect California days when the sky was clear, the air was crisp, and the children were bouncing around like popcorn. The Ream family's Yosemite trips were the kind of stories that lived for generations, part adventure, part comedy, part "Lord, don't let this be the end of us." Annie Mae never went on those trips, but she sure enjoyed the stories when the family came home. While everyone else was buckled in, Larry was outside the car checking out a specific area, stretching, taking his sweet time like he was Yosemite's official greeter, completely unaware of the wild moment that was about to unfold. That's when a bear appeared, big, real, and very much the owner of the land he was standing on. Ruth saw it first and nearly lost her voice trying to warn him. But Larry stayed calm, cool, and unbothered, strolling back to the car like the bear was nothing more than a nosy neighbor. He buckled his seatbelt and said, "If that bear had gotten any closer, we'd be having bear steaks tonight." The car went silent, then erupted into laughter, yelling, and prayer all at once. And after the scare, they had one of their best days ever. They hiked trails under towering trees, fished in cold mountain water, roasted food over the fire, and laughed until their stomachs hurt. The kids climbed rocks, chased each other, and soaked up every moment of being outdoors with their parents. Those trips became family legend, the kind of memories the grandkids still tell like they happened yesterday. They remember the giant trees, the star-filled nights, the crackling campfires, and the way Larry stood steady and fearless whenever a bear wandered too close. And when the family came home and told Annie Mae the whole story, the bear, the screaming, the bear steaks comment, she laughed so hard she had to hold her side. Those Yosemite days stitched the family together in a different way, through adventure, fear, laughter, and the kind of memories that last forever. Stinson Beach tragedy. California wasn't only laughter, poker nights, and family closeness. It also held one of the deepest tragedies the family would ever face. One morning, Larry decided he was going fishing. Ruth had a strong feeling, a sixth sense warning she couldn't shake, and she begged him not to go. She pleaded with him, told him something felt wrong. But Larry brushed it off and went anyway. A few hours later, the phone rang. The news hit like a blow to the chest. Larry had been overtaken by a strong wave at Stinson Beach. The current pulled him under so fast that none of his friends could reach him. He had borrowed Annie's car that morning, like he often did. They came to the house to get her. Annie Mae and Ruth rushed to the scene, hearts pounding, praying it wasn't true. But when they arrived, the truth was waiting, cold, devastating, and irreversible. The whole family was shattered. Larry wasn't just a husband and father, he was the heartbeat of the home. He was the man who made the house feel safe, the one who filled the rooms with laughter, the one who could calm a storm just by walking in. He worked hard, came home tired, and still found the energy to scoop up his children, tease them, love them, guide them. He adored Ruth. He protected her, honored her, made her feel chosen every single day. And he treated Annie Mae like a second mother, joking with her, switching cars with her, trusting her, respecting her, loving her openly and consistently. His loss tore through the family like a storm. The house felt different. The air felt different. Even the light coming through the windows felt different. A man like Larry doesn't leave quietly, his absence echoes. Annie Mae stood there with Ruth, both of them broken in different ways, one losing a husband, the other losing a son-in-law who was more like a son. Their grief wasn't just heavy, it was immediate, suffocating, unforgettable. It was the kind of grief that rearranges a family forever. Larry had been the steady one, the joyful one, the dependable one, the one who made everything feel possible. And when a man like that is taken, the whole foundation shifts. It became one of the darkest chapters of their lives, a moment that changed the family forever. A moment that becomes a kind of family turning point, the place where everything after feels different. Unified. After her son-in-law was buried, Annie Mae felt an even deeper obligation to stay. The loss didn't just break the family's heart, it unbalanced the entire household. Grief settled over the home like a heavy fog, and everyone was trying to find their footing again. Ruth was devastated, the children were confused and frightened, and the rhythm of the house shifted overnight. Annie Mae could feel it. She could feel the weight of the silence. She could feel the ache in the children's eyes. She could feel the way the house no longer moved the same without Larry's presence. And she knew, without anyone saying a word, that she couldn't leave. Those 6 grandchildren needed stability. They needed routine. They needed someone who could still stand upright when the adults around them were falling apart. So instead of pulling away, Annie Mae rooted herself even more firmly in that home. But she wasn't alone. In the days after Larry's passing, the whole house felt different, quieter, heavier, as if the walls themselves were grieving. Yet instead of collapsing under the weight of it all, Ruth and Annie Mae stepped forward together, each holding up a corner of the family in her own way. Ruth, now a widow far too young, became more firmly planted in her role as the center of the home. She cooked more. She prayed more. She watched over her children with a sharper eye and a softer hand, determined to protect them from a world that had suddenly shown its cruelty. She carried the weight of being both mother and father, even while her own heart was breaking. And Annie Mae, steady, seasoned, unshakable, stood right beside her. She didn't take over, she joined in. She stepped into the spaces Larry used to fill, not to replace him, but to keep the family from collapsing under the weight of his absence. She became an anchor next to her daughter, matching Ruth's strength with her own. Together, they made sure the mornings still started, the meals still got cooked, the homework still got done, and the children still felt safe. Their grief didn't make them withdraw, it made them dig in. Side by side, they guided the family through heartbreak, through confusion, through the long nights when the house felt too quiet and the loss felt too big. They held the family together with a shared, quiet strength, Ruth with the fierce love of a mother, Annie Mae with the seasoned wisdom of a woman who had survived much and refused to let tragedy take another piece of her family. Their unity became a kind of intergenerational resilience, a strength passed down without ever being spoken aloud. And in doing so, they honored Larry, the man who had loved them both, respected them both, and trusted them both. Staying wasn't just duty. It was devotion. It was loyalty. It was love. It became one of the defining chapters of their California years, mother and daughter, standing firm in the middle of tragedy, holding their family steady when the world around them had fallen apart. The turning point. After Larry Ream's sudden death, the entire family was shaken. His loss left Ruth standing alone with 6 children and a future that felt overwhelming. In that heavy season, her cousin-in-law became a relentless force of encouragement, calling, visiting, praying, and pushing her to let go and let God until the words finally sank in. Ruth's turning point came the day she threw away a whole carton of cigarettes, choosing faith over coping and surrender over struggle. That decision reshaped the direction of the entire family. Ruth joined the church first and soon convinced Annie Mae to come too. Annie Mae didn't just attend, she transformed. She became one of the mothers of the church, steady, trusted, deeply committed. Together, Ruth and Annie Mae were in church so often that neighbors joked they went 8 days a week. Their faith began to reshape the Ream household. Annie Mae spent every free moment at the house cleaning, cooking, organizing, guiding, anchoring the children. Ruth worked, Annie Mae worked, and together they raised 6 children with God at the center, discipline as the structure, and love holding everything together. Through grief and purpose, both women were transformed prayer warriors, protectors, providers, leaders. Their strength became the foundation for everything the family would become. Flashback: Larry as a loving father. Before the tragedy, Larry was the kind of father who made ordinary days feel special. You could always tell when he was home. The children's laughter got louder. The house felt lighter. Even the air seemed to shift when he walked through the door with that mix of mischief and tenderness. He'd scoop the little ones up and spin them until they squealed. He'd pretend to be tired after work, dragging his feet dramatically, only to break into a grin and chase them through the house. The children adored him because he was present, fully present. On Saturdays, he'd pile them into whichever car he and Annie Mae had swapped that week and take them for ice cream or to the park. He'd sit on the grass with them, shoes off, laughing at their jokes, listening to their stories like they were the most important people in the world. He loved Ruth with that same steady devotion, teasing her just to see her smile, wrapping an arm around her waist, kissing her cheek in front of the kids just to make them giggle. And he treated Annie Mae like a second mother, trusting her, respecting her, joking with her like they shared a secret language. These were the moments stitched into the walls of that home. So when he was gone, it wasn't just the absence of a man, it was the absence of the father who made his children feel safe, the husband who made his wife feel cherished, the son-in-law who made Annie Mae feel honored. This is why the grief was so heavy. This is why the silence felt so loud. Life moved on. When Larry passed, life didn't stop, even though it felt like it should have. The house got quieter, the days felt longer, and the air carried a different weight. But everyone did the best they could, one breath, one task, one day at a time. Ruth carried her grief quietly and steadily. She kept moving because the children were watching, because bills still came, because life demanded motion even when her heart wanted stillness. Annie Mae stepped in, filling the spaces Larry used to fill, not replacing him, but supporting the family he loved. She cooked more, checked in more, prayed harder, making sure the house didn't fall apart under the weight of loss. The children felt the shift too. They missed his laughter, his stories, his boldness. But they kept going: school, chores, church, growing up, learning how to live in a world where their father existed in memories instead of footsteps. Some days were heavy, some peaceful, some full of unexpected laughter that reminded them he would have wanted joy to stay in the house. And slowly, gently, life began to stretch forward again. They talked about him, told his stories, kept his fire alive in the way they lived and loved. Larry had been the spark. Ruth was the steady heartbeat. Annie Mae was the foundation. And even after he was gone, those pieces held. Life moved on, not because they forgot him, but because they carried him with them. In their stories, in their strength, in their laughter, in the way they kept choosing each other, even when it hurt. They did the best they could. And somehow, that was enough. Repo Showdown. Some stories become family folklore because they're funny. Others because they're unbelievable. But the Repo story? That one lived on because it captured Annie Mae exactly as she was: steady, fearless, and absolutely unwilling to let anyone take what belonged to her family. One day, a repo man made the mistake of thinking he could stroll up and take Ruth's car. Annie Mae had helped with the down payment, and she was not about to let anybody drag off something she had invested in. Bless his heart. He didn't know who he was dealing with. He thought he was just doing his job. He didn't expect Annie Mae. The moment one of the grandkids ran inside yelling, "Big Mama, somebody's taking the car," she didn't ask a single question. She didn't grab her purse. She didn't even adjust her glasses. She grabbed a baseball bat. And not for decoration. She marched out that front door like she was stepping into a Western showdown, chin up, shoulders squared, eyes locked on the man who had clearly chosen the wrong driveway that day. The repo man took one look at her, at that bat, at that expression that said, "Try me if you want to," and suddenly remembered he had other places to be. He didn't argue. He didn't explain. He didn't even blink. He unhooked that car so fast he nearly tripped over his own feet trying to get back to his truck. By the time he pulled off, he was probably reconsidering his entire career path. And Annie Mae? She just stood there, bat in hand, making sure he was gone before walking back inside like nothing happened. She might have been a caretaker and a cleaner, but she was also a woman no one wanted to cross. Not on her porch, not in her yard, not on any day ending in Y. A kind of quiet authority that didn't need shouting to be understood. Grandma Dynamite. Annie Mae's grandsons and the neighborhood boys turned the middle of the street into their own personal Yankee Stadium. They had cardboard bases, a dented metal bat that had survived 3 summers, and baseballs that had seen better days. But every time somebody hit a good one, a real good one, that ball sailed straight over the fence into the backyard of the one white lady who still lived on the block. She hadn't moved when the neighborhood turned black, but she made sure everybody knew she wished she had. Every time the boys knocked on her door to ask for their baseballs, she'd bark. "No, you have no business playing in the hot damn street, and I am not going to get your balls." So the boys kept playing, and the balls kept disappearing, until all 15 of them were sitting in that woman's backyard like prisoners of war. Finally, one of the grandsons ran home and told Big Mama Annie Mae that the lady refused to give their balls back. Now, Annie Mae didn't raise her voice. She didn't fuss. She didn't even put her hands on her hips. She just said, "Let me go talk to her." That was the calm before the storm. Annie Mae walked over to the lady's house and knocked politely. The woman opened the door, took one look at her, and slammed it in her face. And that was the moment. Granny Dynamite activated. Annie Mae knocked again, not politely this time. When the woman opened the door again, Annie Mae reached in, pulled her out onto that porch, shook her like a dusty rug, and slapped the holy daylight out of her, not enough to hurt her, just enough to reset her entire attitude. Suddenly the woman found all her energy. She marched straight to the backyard, gathered every single baseball, all 15, and threw them over the fence like she was pitching in the World Series. 3 days later, she moved out of the neighborhood. And the boys? They went right back to playing baseball in the middle of the street, with all 15 balls and a brand new respect for the legend known as Granny Dynamite. Back to work. Annie Mae picked up cleaning jobs, bank cleaning, caretaking, whatever honest work she could find, in between helping raise her grandchildren. Work was never beneath her. It was part of who she was. She moved through those jobs with quiet pride, steady hands, and a sense of responsibility that never wavered. Sometimes she took the boys along with her to the banks when she cleaned. Not because she needed help, Annie Mae could clean a whole building faster than most people could clean a room, but because she wanted them to see what real work looked like. She wanted them to feel the weight of responsibility, to understand that money came from effort, not luck. Her oldest grandson, though, carried a little resentment. He felt she was harder on him than on his younger brothers. He didn't understand, not then, that the oldest child always carries a different role in the family. Annie Mae wasn't being unfair. She was preparing him. She expected more from him because she saw more in him. And she taught them lessons while they worked, lessons that stuck. One of her strictest rules came every time they stepped into a bank lobby after hours. She'd stop them at the door, look each one in the eye, and say, "If you see 1 penny in here, you better act like you didn't see it. And you surely better not put it in your pocket." It wasn't just a rule. It was a value, a code, a line she refused to let them cross. She wanted them to understand integrity, not the kind you talk about, but the kind you live when nobody's watching. She knew how the world looked at young black boys, how quick people were to assume the worst, how one wrong move could follow them for life. So she drilled honesty into them like armor, a kind of moral protection she hoped would outlast her. Her oldest grandson didn't always appreciate it. But years later, he would understand exactly what she was doing. Those nights in the bank, the smell of floor wax, the echo of their footsteps, the weight of her words, became part of the foundation she built in them. Quiet lessons, hard lessons, necessary lessons. And Annie Mae delivered them with the same steady strength she brought to everything she touched. Clorox lady. Annie Mae wasn't just clean. She wasn't just tidy. She wasn't even company clean. She was Clorox clean. If it didn't sparkle, she wasn't satisfied. If it didn't smell like bleach, she didn't trust it. Because Annie Mae lived by one cleaning philosophy. If a little bleach works, a lot of bleach works even better. And Lord, the bras. She used to buy nice bras from Kmart, bring them home, and instead of putting bleach in the water when it was time to wash them, she'd pour the bleach directly on the bra like she was blessing it. Instant destruction. Fabric melting like cotton candy in a rainstorm. Then she'd march right back to Kmart, hold up the shredded remains, and demand, "I want a refund." This thing fell apart. The salespeople would look at the bra, look at her, look back at the bra, trying to figure out how to politely say, "Ma'am, this bra looks like it survived a chemical attack." When they refused, she'd straighten her back and say, "Get me the manager." And the manager always came, because Annie Mae didn't ask for managers. She summoned them. And somehow, she always walked out with a refund or a replacement. But the funniest moment came the day her granddaughter caught her in the act. She walked into the bathroom and saw her grandmother washing her bra in the sink, pouring straight bleach on it like she was marinating chicken. Big Mama, that's why they keep disintegrating. You supposed to put the bleach in the water. Annie Mae froze mid-pour, looked at her, looked at the bra melting in her hand, and said, "Well, I didn't know." Then, without missing a beat, "They should make M stronger. Stronger." As if the problem was the bra, not the industrial-strength bleach bath she was giving it. And then she kept right on bleaching. Because Annie Mae wasn't changing for nobody, not Kmart, not the manager, not the bras, not even the laws of fabric science. She was the Clorox lady. And the Clorox lady did things her way. Everybody in the house eventually begged her, "Please don't wash my clothes." Because one wash from Annie Mae and every color you owned came out looking like it had seen the light of heaven. She eventually did start putting the bleach in the water, thus ending her countless returns to Kmart. One way or another. Annie Mae didn't shop at Value Village because she loved thrift stores. She shopped there because she was helping raise 6 children on a budget that had to stretch like rubber. She was doing what mothers and grandmothers have always done, making a way out of no way. But the kids? Oh, the kids were mortified. Whenever Annie Mae pulled into the Goodwill parking lot, the whole car went silent, the kind of silence that only comes from pure childhood embarrassment. The moment she parked, all the kids did the same thing. They ducked, they hid, they slid down in the seats like they were trying to disappear into the floorboards. Somebody would whisper, "Lord, please don't let nobody from school see us." Meanwhile, Annie Mae was already halfway out the car, purse on her arm, walking toward the store with purpose, not excitement, not joy, purpose. She had 6 kids to help clothe, and every dollar mattered. She'd turn back and say, "Y'all coming?" And from inside the car came a chorus of muffled voices, "No. We'll wait right here." They'd crouch down so low their noses were touching their knees, praying nobody recognized the car, praying nobody recognized them, praying the Goodwill sign didn't reflect in the windows and expose their location. Meanwhile, Annie Mae was inside doing what needed to be done, checking seams, stretching fabric, making sure everything she picked would survive school, play, and hand-me-downs. She wasn't bargain hunting for fun. She was providing. And the funniest part? The moment they got home and saw the clothes she bought cute, clean, practically new, they'd be the first ones wearing them. But in public? Oh no. They were sticking to the story. We do not go to Goodwill. The Value Village incident. Maximum embarrassment. One day, her grandson Richard was outside playing when a friend admired his outfit. "Man, that's nice. Where you get that from?" Before he could even open his mouth, Annie Mae, standing nearby, proud as ever, chimed in. "Value Village. Got it for $1. Richard froze. His friend froze. Time froze. He said later he felt his soul leave his body. He turned red, turned purple, turned every shade of embarrassment known to mankind. He wanted the ground to open up and swallow him whole. And Annie Mae? She was smiling like she had just announced a major sale on the radio. She wasn't trying to embarrass him, she was proud of her bargain. Proud of stretching $1. Proud of keeping those kids looking sharp on a budget. But Richard said from that day forward, Whenever she even mentioned Value Village, his stomach dropped. The truth behind it all. Annie Mae didn't care about embarrassment. She cared about providing. She cared about making sure those kids had what they needed. She cared about stretching every dollar so nobody went without. If the kids wanted to hide in the car, that was their business. Because Annie Mae shopped where the budget said shop and the budget said, at the time, Value Village. And as she liked to remind them, they should have been proud. Larry left behind some very handsome sons, and she wasn't walking out of Value Village with rags. She found the best threads in that whole store. Falling in love. Annie Mae was full of spunk, and she was still a very attractive woman. She carried herself with a confidence that didn't need announcing. It was in her walk, her smile, the way she kept herself together. People noticed. And one man in particular noticed a lot. There was a grocery store called Food Bowl she frequented, and a widower who worked there had recently lost his wife. When he saw Annie Mae, something in him woke back up. He started looking at her a little longer, smiling a little wider, flirting a little bolder. And Annie Mae noticed. Before long, she found herself going to that store on purpose, not because she needed groceries, but because she knew he'd be there. Their flirting grew easy, natural, playful. Two grown folks enjoying each other's company, both knowing exactly what they were doing. But before he made a move, he did something that showed the kind of man he was. He went to her daughter and asked, "Do you mind if I marry your mother?" He wanted her blessing. He wanted to do it right. He wanted Annie Mae with respect, not secrecy. And soon enough, the two of them were standing in front of a justice of the peace, getting married. The moment he married her and brought her to his house, he put her name on the deed, no hesitation, no conditions. He loved her, trusted her, and wanted her to have security. But his house, Lord, that house had the look of a place lived in by a man who had been alone too long. When she walked through his home, she saw the truth of how he'd been living. Cans. Everywhere. Open cans on tables, on counters, on nightstands, the quiet evidence of a man who had been eating straight out of them, room to room, surviving instead of living. Annie Mae took one look around and knew exactly what needed to be done. She didn't judge him. She just rolled up her sleeves. She gathered her grandsons, her little cleaning crew, and they got to work. They scrubbed, dusted, polished, swept, and wiped until the whole place rose up to her spotless standard. What had once been dull and neglected became warm, orderly, and alive again. Her husband watched her transform that home the same way she transformed every space she ever touched, with intention, with pride, with love stitched into every movement. Her new husband adored her, not halfway, not quietly, but with the full-hearted devotion of a man who knew he'd married a woman of rare strength. He adored her for her beauty, her spunk, her sharp tongue, and that no-nonsense way she ran a household like a kingdom she'd been born to rule. Annie Mae stepped into that marriage with the same grace and fire she brought to every chapter of her life. And when she stepped into the kitchen and cooked him his first real meal, hot, seasoned, made with love, he welcomed it like a man who had been starving for more than just food. He welcomed the warmth, the care, the home she brought with her. He didn't just appreciate her. He honored her. He proudly handed her the keys to his truck, and she drove it like a badge of respect. And when he blessed her with that big yellow LTD, upgrading her from the little Maverick she'd been puttering around in, she accepted it with a smile that said she knew exactly what it meant. It wasn't just a car. It was a declaration. A declaration that she deserved comfort. She deserved ease. She deserved to be poured into after a lifetime of pouring into others. And Annie Mae didn't waste a second proving why she was worth every bit of it. He adored her for it. He adored her for everything. He didn't just love her. He honored her. Honeymoon. During her honeymoon, Annie Mae was feeling happy, cute, and newly married, living her best late-in-life love story. What she wasn't expecting was her favorite grandson, Marcus, using his key and walking straight into the house like it was any other day. He opened that door, took one look, and froze like a statue in a museum. He didn't scream. He didn't gasp. He didn't even blink. He just backed out the door as quietly as a church mouse, closed it gently behind him, and stood on the porch trying to process what his eyes had just witnessed. A minute later, Marcus knocked, loud enough to warn them, soft enough to be polite. Inside, chaos broke out. Annie Mae and her new husband were scrambling like two teenagers caught by a parent. She was straightening her dress, smoothing her wig, patting it down like she was trying to iron it with her bare hands. He was trying to look normal, which only made him look guiltier. They opened the door, both of them standing there stiff as boards, smiling way too hard. Marcus stepped inside with the biggest grin on his face and said, "So, what y'all doing?" Annie Mae, still adjusting that wig like it was trying to escape her head, replied, "Nothing. Nothing." As if he hadn't just walked in on the most not-nothing moment of her life. Marcus nodded slowly, still grinning, and said, "Okay then." And that was it. He never told the story to embarrass her, only to laugh about it years later. Because the truth was simple. Annie Mae was living. She was happy. She was loved. And she was still quick enough to straighten a wig in under 3 seconds flat. Pops, Granny Comedy Hour. One afternoon, Marcus was supposed to be watching Pops while Annie Mae went to work. Instead, he invited his girlfriend Tandy over, and she walked straight into the kind of everyday chaos only Pops and Annie Mae could create without even trying. Pops was already rocking in his chair, glasses sliding down his nose, laughing like he had advance tickets to the drama. Every few minutes he'd say, "There's gonna be a big fight when Annie Mae get home." He loved his wife's fire, her fussing, her voice, her whole performance. To him, Annie Mae wasn't just his wife, she was entertainment. Marcus was running around like a chicken with no head, trying to keep up with his pigeons, the neighborhood boys who loved pigeons too, and the steady stream of people knocking at the door. He kept sprinting in and out instead of doing the chores Annie Mae had left him. Tandy sat on the couch watching her soap operas, but really, she was watching Pops. He was the main event. Every time the doorbell rang, Marcus bolted outside, and Pops cackled like he knew something Marcus didn't. "There's gonna be a big fight," he repeated, rubbing his hands together. He was practically counting down the minutes. Then the front door opened and the whole house shifted. Annie Mae had arrived. She walked in with her purse on her arm and a look that said she already knew Marcus hadn't done a single thing she told him to do. She said hello to Tandy, then immediately tore into Marcus. That woman meant business when it came to the perfect cleanliness of her house. Marcus panicked and tried to do everything at once, vacuuming, picking up clothes, wiping down tables, but every time he started one chore, something else demanded his attention as Annie Mae kept yelling at him to do this, do that. Pops just rocked and laughed hysterically. And Annie Mae's voice was getting louder by the second. Then Annie Mae sniffed the air, turned toward Pops, and said, "Lord have mercy, what is that smell?" Pops froze. The show was no longer funny, not while the spotlight shifted to him. She fussed him out too, waving her hands and giving him the full Annie Mae treatment. Pops didn't say a word. He knew better than to talk back when the general was in the room. Then she yelled, "Marcus, get your ass in there and go clean him." Marcus stood there holding the vacuum like a shield. "Man, Big Mama, what you want me to do?" Tandy tried not to laugh and failed. Marcus noticed and said politely, "You can just go home." But Tandy wasn't going anywhere. She had never seen a grandmother like Annie Mae and wasn't about to miss the rest of the show. Marcus went into the bathroom with a towel wrapped around his face like he was entering a hazardous zone. Pops shuffled behind him like a man headed to Judgment Day. Every few minutes Marcus came out gasping for air and Annie Mae yelled, "Get back in there and finish." Eventually Pops came out clean, dressed, and smelling like soap instead of trouble. Annie Mae fixed his plate first, fried chicken and giant fries, and he tore into it like he had survived a war. Marcus came out next, exhausted, and told Tandy to make his plate. She did. He looked at it and said, "I am not a bird." Then he went back to pile on more food. They all sat down and ate together, and for a moment the chaos settled. Pops was happy. Annie Mae was satisfied. Marcus was alive. And Tandy was thoroughly entertained. Because nobody, and I mean nobody, ran a house like Annie Mae. And Pops was her biggest fan, until bath time. Loved. Her husband absolutely adored her. Annie Mae's spunk, her feistiness, her quick tongue, all the things that might have scared another man away only made him love her more. He got the biggest kick out of the way she would fuss at him. She'd put her hands on her hips, give him that sharp look, and let him have a piece of her mind. And instead of getting offended, he would just laugh and laugh. He thought she was the funniest, liveliest woman he had ever met. Her fussing didn't bother him one bit. In fact, it delighted him. He loved her fire, her spirit, the way she didn't hold back. To him, it meant she cared. It meant she was alive. It meant she was his. And Annie Mae, with all her sass and sparkle, gave him something he hadn't felt in a long time: joy. He loved her deeply, openly, and without hesitation, the kind of love that made her feel seen, cherished, and chosen all over again. A kind of late-life devotion that becomes sweeter because it arrives when you least expect it. Bath time betrayal. Another day Marcus was in the bathroom bathing Pops, and the word bathing was being abused. Pops sat on the shower chair looking like a damp, confused pigeon, while Marcus looked like he'd been held hostage for 3 days. He wasn't washing that man. A sprinkle. A swipe. Mostly just relocating dirt. Even Pops side-eyed him like, "Boy, what is this?" Then, like judgment from heaven, Annie Mae appeared in the doorway. No greeting. No warning. Just, "Move, boy. Let me see what foolishness you call bathing this man." Marcus stepped aside instantly, like a cashier getting replaced by the manager. Annie Mae rolled up her sleeves, cracked her knuckles, grabbed that washcloth like it owed her money, and went to work. She flipped Pops like a pancake, scrubbed him like she was erasing his past, turned him like a rotisserie chicken, rinsed him like she was detailing a Cadillac. Pops went through all 5 stages of grief in 30 seconds. Then, out of nowhere, he slapped her. Not a tap. Not a warning. A full, "I'm sick of this" slap. Marcus froze. His soul left his body. He just knew his grandmother was about to send Pops to glory. But she didn't swing, didn't yell, didn't blink. She inhaled, exhaled, and said, calm as a saint, "You better be glad I'm containing myself. If I hit you back, you'd be standing in front of our maker right now." Everything in the room blinked: Pops, Marcus, even the shower curtain. Then she went right back to scrubbing like nothing happened. Marcus stood in the corner, clutching the towel like a security blanket, whispering, "Lord, please don't let her kill him." When she finished, Pops was clean, shiny, moisturized, and quiet as a church mouse. Annie Mae wrapped him in a towel, patted the other cheek, and said, "Now, sit down and behave." And Pops behaved. Because nobody scared a man straight like Annie Mae. Annie Mae, happy and peaceful in California. Annie Mae didn't arrive in California looking for a new life. She arrived looking for rest. But California had other plans. What began as an escape from betrayal and exhaustion slowly became the most peaceful, rewarding chapter of her entire story. She stepped off that Greyhound bus with 2 battered suitcases and a heart still bruised from Kentucky. But in that crowded house, 6 grandkids running wild, a daughter doing her best, and a son-in-law who could charm the sun, she found something she hadn't felt in years: belonging. California didn't just welcome her. It needed her. She became the backbone of the household, the quiet force that kept everything from falling apart. She taught, she cooked, she cleaned, she protected, she hustled, she prayed, and she laughed. And in return, California gave her something Kentucky never could: a life she chose. Not a life forced by duty. Not a life stolen by family greed. A life built on her own terms. Friday nights at the card table became her throne room. The grandkids became her legacy. The neighborhood became her kingdom. And peace, real peace, became her reward. She traded the silence of a lonely farmhouse for a home full of noise, love, and purpose. She traded betrayal for belonging. She traded years of sacrifice for decades of joy. Annie Mae didn't just move to California. She blossomed there. She found laughter again. She found community again. She found herself again. And when she finally laid her head down at night, she did so knowing she had chosen dignity over bitterness, freedom over fighting, and love over everything else. Her move to California wasn't an ending. It was her rebirth. A woman who walked away with nothing but her dignity ended up with everything that truly mattered, a testament to self-made resilience. I'm Riá Marlowe, and this is the story of the woman who walked away from a Kentucky farmhouse and stepped into a life built on grace, with just enough fire to light up every room she entered. Thank you for sitting with me. Subscribe to the Chronicles, and I'll see you in 1 to 3 days with another unforgettable story. Remember, love doesn't keep a ledger, it simply keeps the light on.